If you have ever watched someone use their title as a weapon, if you have ever been in a room where a person's credentials were deployed not to inform, but to diminish, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Because what happened on the Family Feud stage one afternoon in the winter of 2024 is the kind of story that makes every parent who has ever chosen their family over a career feel something click back into place. There is a particular kind of arrogance that belongs to people who have worked very hard for a credential and have, over time, allowed that credential to become the whole of their self-concept. They are not always unkind people, but they have spent so many years in an environment where their title determines their standing in a room that they have lost the ability to understand why someone without the title might still belong in the room on equal terms. On one Wednesday afternoon in Atlanta, that arrogance introduced itself to a woman who had spent 11 years making one of the most demanding professional choices a person can make, the choice to redirect every skill, every hour, and every ounce of capability she possessed toward the raising of her children rather than the advancement of a career that would have advanced very well indeed. The woman was Teresa Okonkwo. She was a stay-at-home mother of 4. She held a master's degree in biomedical engineering that she had earned at the top of her class, and she had, on this particular afternoon, the significant misfortune of being paired against a man who believed that her decision to use that degree at home rather than in a laboratory made her, in some fundamental and unambiguous sense, less. Steve Harvey disagreed, and the way he expressed that disagreement is going to stay with you. Teresa Okonkwo was 44 years old. She had grown up in Lagos, Nigeria, and had arrived in the United States at 19 on a full academic scholarship to a university in Ohio. One of 17 students selected from across West Africa, that year based on a competitive examination that her mother had driven her 40 kilometers to sit. She had studied biomedical engineering with a focus on pediatric medical devices, had completed a master's degree at 23, and had been accepted into a doctoral program when she discovered she was pregnant with her first child. She had left the program, not reluctantly, not under pressure, not because the program asked her to or because her husband insisted. She had made the decision herself, deliberately, over the course of several weeks, in the way she made most significant decisions, by examining the available information from every relevant angle and arriving at the conclusion that was most consistent with her values. Her values at 24, with her first child arriving and her husband beginning a demanding residency in cardiology, were clear. She wanted to raise her children with the same quality of presence and attention that her own mother had brought to her upbringing in Lagos, and she was not prepared to compromise that quality for a credential she already half possessed and could return to later if she chose. She had not returned to it. Not because she could not have. She had maintained her professional knowledge with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to everything, reading journals, attending conferences online, staying current in a field she still loved with the intellectual fidelity of a person who has not stopped being curious simply because she stopped being employed. But 4 children across 11 years is not a gap in a career. It is a career. And Teresa had approached it as such, with structure, with rigor, and with the specific, applied intelligence of a biomedical engineer who understood systems, and had devoted herself to the most consequential system she would ever be responsible for. Her husband, Dr. Emmanuel Okonkwo, was a cardiologist at a teaching hospital in Atlanta. He was warm, proud of his wife with a specificity and a constancy that their children had grown up absorbing as the baseline for how a man was supposed to regard the person he had married. And he was, by Teresa's assessment, and by the evidence of 11 years, the partner that her decision had required in order to work. Someone who understood what she was doing and what it cost, and who had never, in 11 years, allowed either of them to forget it. He had submitted the Family Feud application in Teresa's name as a birthday surprise, which she had discovered when the confirmation email arrived in the shared family account. Their reaction, as described by their eldest daughter Adiz, 20, who had been present for the discovery, had been characteristic. Teresa had read the email twice, verified the date, checked her calendar for conflicts, and then looked at a manual with the expression of a woman who has been married long enough to love a surprise and be entirely unsurprised by it. Adiz, along with Teresa's sister-in-law Blessing, 39, and Emmanuel's brother Chukwu, 41, rounded out the team. All 5 of them had prepared. Teresa had prepared most thoroughly, which surprised nobody who knew her. The opposing family was the Prescott family from Nashville. At its center was Dr. Lawrence Prescott, 57, an orthopedic surgeon with 28 years of practice, 3 published books, 2 named fellowships, and a manner that had been refined by those achievements into something that occupied the precise midpoint between confidence and contempt. He was not without charm. He was effortlessly fluent in social settings, and had the kind of practiced grace that comes from having been the most credentialed person in most rooms for the better part of 3 decades. He was also a man who had spent those 3 decades in an environment that organized its hierarchies explicitly and publicly around degrees and titles, and who had carried that organizational principle into every room he subsequently entered, including, on this particular afternoon, the Family Feud studio. The 2 families were introduced with the standard warmth of a Family Feud opening, and Steve Harvey worked the pre-game segment with his customary attention. He reached Dr. Prescott early in the Prescott introduction and received, in response to the standard question about occupation, a response that was 3 times longer than the format required and included the 2 fellowships, a recent publication, and a reference to his hospital's national ranking. Steve received it with the professional grace that 30 years of live television produces and moved along the line. When he reached Teresa, he asked her what she did. "I'm a stay-at-home mother," she said. 4 children, 11 years. Steve acknowledged this with genuine warmth and asked the follow-up question he often asked parents who had made this choice. What was the hardest part? Teresa said without missing a beat and in the dry, precise register that her family recognized immediately, explaining to other adults at dinner parties that yes, it is in fact a full-time job. The audience laughed. Steve laughed. Emmanuel, across the stage on the same team, closed his eyes briefly in the expression of a man savoring something he had heard before and is still not tired of. Dr. Prescott, 2 positions away on the opposing line, smiled. It was the smile he had deployed earlier, the one that occupied the midpoint between charm and condescension, and he said, with the ease of a man who believed he was contributing helpfully to a warm moment, "Well, my wife stays home too. Though she has a background in art history, so I always say she made the right call." He laughed at his own observation. His family laughed alongside him, in the way that families laugh at a patriarch's joke when the habit of laughing has outlasted the evaluation of whether the joke deserves it. Teresa did not laugh. She looked at Dr. Prescott for 1 measured second, the look of a woman running a rapid assessment, and then looked forward with the composed neutrality of a person who has decided that the current setting does not call for the response the comment deserves. Emmanuel had stopped smiling. Adiz had noticed her father stop smiling. Steve Harvey had noticed all 3 of these things in the span of approximately 4 seconds, which is the perceptual equivalent, for a man with 30 years of live stage experience, of a full briefing. The game began. It proceeded through the first round with the energy of a genuinely competitive match. The Prescott family was strong. Dr. Prescott was fast on the buzzer, authoritative in his answers, and correct often enough to keep his team in contention. The Okonkwo family was stronger. Teresa answered with a speed and a precision that drew increasingly warm audience responses, and she answered in a register that, to anyone paying attention, was recognizably not the register of a person operating at the edge of their capacity, but the register of a person operating well within it. During the transition between the first and second rounds, Steve conducted the conversational exchange that fills those gaps, and he turned to Dr. Prescott with a question that appeared casual but was not. "You're a surgeon. You must work incredibly long hours. What does your family give up for that?" Dr. Prescott answered with the practiced fluency of a man who had answered this question at medical galas and hospital fundraisers for 28 years. He talked about the sacrifice, the calling, the importance of the work. He said that his family had been extraordinarily supportive. He said that his wife had made it possible by managing everything at home. He said this with genuine gratitude and with no apparent awareness that the sentence immediately preceding it, the one about art history and the right call, had already established the framework within which the word managing landed. Steve listened to all of it. Then he turned to Teresa. "Teresa," he said, "Dr. Prescott mentioned that his wife manages everything at home. You also manage everything at home. I want to ask you something that I don't think gets asked often enough." He paused. "What does your work actually look like? Not the summary version, the real version." It was a question designed not to produce a speech, but to produce an answer, the kind of open, specific question that invites a person to speak from the inside of their experience rather than from its surface. Teresa looked at Steve. She recognized a genuine invitation when she received one, and she answered it. Teresa Okonkwo spoke for approximately 3 minutes. She spoke in the organized, sequential way of an engineer describing a system, because that is what she was doing. She described her household not as a domestic arrangement, but as a functioning operational unit with 4 distinct individuals at different developmental stages, each with specific needs that required specific responses, none of which could be scheduled in advance, all of which had to be triaged in real time against a backdrop of logistics that would have required, she said, a project manager, a therapist, a tutor, a nutritionist, and a medical coordinator if the services were contracted externally rather than provided internally. She said that she had a master's degree in biomedical engineering and that she applied it every day, not to devices, but to systems. To the complex, nonlinear, perpetually updating system of 4 children growing simultaneously through different stages of development, each of whom required her to maintain a working model of their current state and adjust her responses accordingly. She said that the cognitive load of this work was, by any reasonable metric, comparable to the cognitive load of her graduate research, with the added variable that the subjects could not be paused, did not operate on a schedule, and would remember forever whether she had been present. She said this without heat, without performance, with the calm authority of a person who has thought about this carefully for 11 years and is simply describing what she found. The studio audience was completely still. Not because they were stunned, because they were listening. There is a difference, and the room had the quality of the latter. When Teresa finished, Steve Harvey did not immediately speak. He let the answer sit in the room for a moment, the way you let something settle before you add to it. Then he turned to Dr. Prescott. "You said earlier," Steve said, "that Teresa's counterpart made the right call because of her background in art history. I want to give you the opportunity to revise that statement, now that you've heard Teresa describe her background and what she does with it." The room understood immediately what was happening. This was not a trap. Steve's tone was entirely free of aggression. It was an invitation. But it was the kind of invitation that arrives with the full weight of what has just been said in the room, and declining it would require a man to be either dishonest or oblivious, and Dr. Lawrence Prescott, whatever his faults, was neither. He was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a man doing something he did not do frequently in professional settings, recalibrating. "I think," he said carefully, "that I made an assumption about what the work looked like, about what it required." He paused. "I don't think I was right to make it." It was not a dramatic admission. It was a precise one, which was, given the man making it, the appropriate kind. Steve nodded. Then he turned back to Teresa and said something that became the most quoted sentence of the entire afternoon. "I want to say something for the record, and I want to say it clearly because I think this needs to be said loudly and often until it stops needing to be said." He looked at her directly. "What you are doing is not a lesser version of a career. It is not a pause in a career. It is not something a person does when they run out of other options or when their background does not qualify them for better. It is the most consequential professional decision a person with your qualifications can make, and the only reason it does not carry the status it deserves is that the economy has no mechanism for valuing work that does not produce an invoice. That is a failure of the economy. It is not a failure of yours." The audience rose. Not in sections, not in a wave all at once, in the instantaneous way that a crowd rises when it has been waiting for something and has just received it without warning. The sound was immediate and sustained, and had the specific quality that the production team had learned, across hundreds of episodes, to recognize as distinct from ordinary applause. It was the sound of a room that felt something, not just heard something. Teresa Okonkwo stood in the center of it with the composed, precise stillness of a woman who does not perform emotion she is not feeling, and who was, in that moment, feeling something she did not have an immediate word for. Her husband, Emmanuel, across the stage on the same team, was looking at her with the expression of a man watching the world finally catch up to something he had known for 11 years. The game continued, and the Okonkwo family won, not narrowly, not after a contested fast money round, but with the clean, satisfying margin of a team that had been the stronger side from the opening buzzer, and had simply been allowed over the course of 2 hours to demonstrate it fully. Teresa answered the final fast money question, something that holds a family together through hard times, with the top-ranked response, which was not a word or a concept but a practice, showing up. The audience received it with the recognition that greets answers that are both correct and true. The episode aired 7 weeks later. The clip of Steve's speech to Teresa, beginning with the sentence about the most consequential professional decision and ending with the observation about the failure of the economy, was viewed 23 million times within the first 48 hours of its release. It traveled with particular speed through 3 distinct communities. Stay-at-home parents who forwarded it with messages that ranged from 3 words to 3 paragraphs. Women who had left professional careers for their families and had spent years in the specific, exhausting position of defending that choice to people who did not understand it. And professionals in fields adjacent to education and child development who recognized in Teresa's description of her work a precision that most public discussions of parenting entirely lacked. The phrase that circulated most widely, more widely even than the video itself, was the sentence about the failure of the economy. It appeared on social media posts, in opinion pieces, in the newsletters of parenting advocacy organizations, and in at least 2 academic papers on the labor economics of unpaid domestic work, both of which cited the clip as an example of the rare public articulation of a point that economists had been making in academic literature for decades without ever producing a version that reached a general audience. Steve Harvey addressed the moment in a podcast interview published 5 weeks after the episode aired. He was direct about what had moved him. Teresa described her work, he said, the way an engineer describes a system, because she is an engineer and she has been engineering her household for 11 years with the same intelligence she would have brought to any laboratory. And I looked at Dr. Prescott after she finished, and I saw something that I have seen many times in many rooms, a person reassessing, not humiliated reassessing, because the information had arrived and there was no honest way to maintain the prior conclusion in the face of it. And I thought, that is the job. That is exactly the job, not to embarrass people, to ensure that the information arrives. He was asked about the economy line, the sentence that had traveled furthest from the clip into independent circulation. That sentence has been true for a long time, he said. It was not original to me. Economists have said it. Sociologists have said it. The difference, maybe, was the setting. A lot of true things get said in academic papers and in policy discussions and in rooms full of people who already agree. Occasionally one gets said in a different kind of room. A room with 500 people in it who have all made choices about their own lives, and a camera running, and a woman standing there who had earned the right to hear it. I just happened to be the one standing at the microphone. Dr. Lawrence Prescott gave a brief interview to a Nashville medical journal 3 months after the episode aired. It was not the kind of interview that medical journals typically publish. It was personal rather than professional, and the editor's note that preceded it acknowledged as much. In it, Dr. Prescott said that the afternoon had been the most direct confrontation with his own assumptions that he had experienced in a professional setting in 28 years of medicine. He said that he had gone into surgery the morning after watching the clip and had found himself thinking about Teresa's description of real-time triage and the impossibility of pausing the subjects, and had recognized in that description something structurally identical to what he did every day in an operating room, and had sat with the comparison for some time. He said that his wife, who had a background in art history and had raised their 3 children with what he now understood to have been a comparable quality of skill and devotion, had watched the clip with him the night it aired and had said nothing when it ended. He had asked her what she was thinking. She had said she was thinking about all the dinner parties. He had understood immediately what she meant. He said he had not known what to say. She had said that was all right. He did not need to say anything. She just wanted him to know. Teresa Okonkwo gave a single written statement 4 weeks after the episode, released through the production team. It was the statement of a biomedical engineer, organized, precise, and entirely free of sentiment it had not earned. She said that the response from the public had been larger than anything she had anticipated, and that she had read a significant portion of it. Because she read things thoroughly, she noted, and that what she had found in it was not primarily people responding to her specifically, but people responding to the experience of having a choice they had made, and defended and lived inside, be described accurately in a room where the description had consequences. She said that the word she kept returning to was consequences, that what Steve Harvey had done was not simply say something true, but say something true in a setting where saying it true had cost something, where there was a man standing in the room who had to hear it and respond to it and revise his position in front of 500 people. She said that true things said without consequences were what most public discourse consisted of. She said that true things said with consequences were rarer and more valuable, and that she was grateful to have been the person standing in the room when one arrived. She closed the statement with a sentence about her children. She said that her eldest daughter, Adiz, who was studying engineering at university and had watched the clip in her dormitory room with her roommate, had called her afterward and had said only, "I always knew, but now I have a video." Teresa had told her that was more than most people had. Adiz had said she knew. She said she had learned that from her mother. Emmanuel Okonkwo made no public statement. He did not need to. The expression on his face during Teresa's 3 minutes, the expression of a man watching the world finally catch up, had been captured by a camera operator with a long lens and had circulated almost as widely as the speech itself. People shared it with captions that ranged from single emojis to paragraphs. The image required no annotation. It was the face of a man who had been right about someone for 11 years in private and had just watched the rest of the world arrive at the conclusion he had never doubted. Steve Harvey received a card in the mail 6 weeks after the episode, written in the precise, organized hand of a woman who had been educated in 3 countries and had written laboratory reports and research summaries and had chosen for this particular document to write very simply. It said, "Thank you for making the information arrive. My children will watch this for the rest of their lives. So will I." It was signed, T. Okonkwo MSc, stay-at-home mother. Steve kept the card. He kept all of them. But this one, he said later, he kept in a specific place, in the drawer of the desk where he prepared for tapings, so that he would see it on the mornings when the work felt like television and he needed to be reminded that it was something else. If this story reached you, if it named a choice you have made, or watched someone you love make, that the world has not always valued the way it deserved, hit that like button right now. And if you believe that the most consequential work often arrives without a title and without an invoice, subscribe to this channel. We bring you stories like this one every single week. Stories about real people, real choices, and the moments when the truth is said in a room where saying it costs something. We will see you in the next one.